So welcome to this panel on reporting on the climate crisis through the eyes of children. This is the fourth in a series of webinars about early childhood reporting that are part of the Early Childhood Journalism Initiative at the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma at Columbia University. This initiative is possible thanks to the support of several international foundations. They are the Bernard van Leer Foundation in the Netherlands, the Maria Cecilia Soto Vidigal Foundation in Brazil, and the Two Lilies Fund in the US. Our first webinar looked at the mental health of infants and caregivers, our second one at migration, and our third one at orphans. This is the last one for this year, but you can go back and watch all four. I will leave a link so that you can find them all, and they include some really helpful tip sheets that will help you, especially if you're a journalist, navigate these topics a little bit more easily. If you're joining us live, we'll have space at the end for questions. So if you're on Zoom, you can just add them to the Q&A section or the comment section. The same for Facebook and Instagram. You can just leave comments and we'll get back to them at the end. And in the meantime, especially if you're on Zoom, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us where you're from and where you work. And I'm Irene Caselli. I'll be your host and moderator tonight. I've been a journalist for almost 20 years. I was a foreign correspondent in Latin America for a decade. And 5 years ago, I started working on early childhood reporting, first as a staff writer at The Correspondent, and now with my own newsletter that is called The First 1,000 Days. I also collaborate with the Dart Center's Early Childhood Journalism Initiative. I'm joining from Athens in Greece, where I'm based. And if you see me moving around quite a lot, is because I'm days away from giving birth and sitting down is becoming very difficult. Now, to our guests in alphabetical order, we go to Bavreen Kandari. She's a campaigner pushing for clean air in India and beyond. She's also a co-founder of Warrior Moms, which brings mothers together across India to call for clean air for the sake of their children's health. Bavreen has spearheaded other public movements and campaigns in India to call for action on environmental justice issues. Her campaigning is motivated by her twin daughters and her concerns about Delhi's excessively polluted air. She's a recipient of the Climate Parent Fellowship created by Our Kids Climate and Parents for Future Global, which support parent-led and intergenerational climate organizing. She represented the climate parent movement at COP26 as a part of a delegation of mothers calling on leaders to tackle air pollution, and she will attend COP27 in the same capacity. Hello, Bavreen. She's joining us from Delhi.
Hello, thank you.
We then go to Katie Worth, who tells stories about science, politics, and their myriad intersections. She began her career as a beat reporter at the Pacific Daily News on Guam, and later worked as an enterprise reporter for the San Francisco Examiner. Her work has appeared in Scientific American, This American Life, National Geographic, Slate, Vice, The Wall Street Journal, and the Best American Science and Nature Writing Anthology. Katie joined the Boston-based Frontline team in 2015, and for the following 6 years worked on special investigative projects for the series. She's the author of the book Miseducation: How Climate Change is Taught in America, published in November of last year. And she joins us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Hi, Katie.
Hi, having me.
And then finally to Robert Hughes, a researcher at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He initially trained for and practiced clinical medicine and then completed a master's in public health at Harvard School of Public Health as a Kennedy Scholar. From there, he joined the UK Department for International Development, DFID, as a health nutrition advisor, working in Pakistan, Yemen, Whitehall, and then leading the UKAID Human Development Program in Zambia. He later joined the Children's Investment Fund Foundation in London as a senior fellow to lead development of their early childhood development strategy and programming and supporting work to build linkages between global health and climate portfolios. He's also worked as a consultant to the Clean Air Fund, Google X, the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, WHO, and DFID. So why do we need a webinar dedicated to covering the climate crisis from the perspective of young children? Of course, we don't need to sort of talk about why the climate crisis is so important, but what's relevant is that the climate crisis is particularly dangerous for children under 5 and for pregnant people. And yet there's very little reporting that focuses on its impact on them. Now, with the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP27, coming up just in a few weeks in Egypt, looking at the issue through the lens of children is especially essential. There's loads of reports coming out, for example, of African youth activists not being accepted into the conference, about the voices of children not coming through. So given the situation, we wanted to create a webinar to help journalists come up with some ideas and to have more knowledge to understand how the intersection of early childhood and climate come together. I'll start with Rob because he's our expert when it comes to climate and early childhood. So Rob, why are children, let's start from the basics, like why are children so affected by the climate crisis? And is this knowledge sort of present enough on the public policy agenda?
Thanks, Irene. And I'll start with the second one because the answer is really simple, no. But going back, I'll come back to that in a second. Going back to your first one, when we think about the relevance of an issue, we can think about things like biological vulnerability. So there is a point around young people, their physiology, their reliance on the adults and the environment around them that makes them especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So this is just a very basic fact of kind of biology that the young children, especially in those 1,000 days that we sort of talk about, that those early years when their brains are developing the fastest, when those exposures they're subject to really are subject to a kind of amplification. Early exposures affect later life much bigger than later life exposures affect later life. That's just a basic thing that I'm sure you've been discussing in some of the other webinars. So there's a kind of biological vulnerability. I guess that what I would add to that is that there's also a maybe two things. One is there's also a kind of equity and justice angle to this too. Our children inherit the earth. Very obvious. It sort of sounds like a nice slogan, but it's very true. The timeframes we're talking about, we're no longer talking about climate change as a distant thing. That time is long gone, and anyone from Florida to Pakistan can attest to that this month. So it's not a distant thing, but the worst effects of it are going to be in the futures, and quite frankly, they're going to be when the adults who are currently, asleep at the wheel are no longer around. And so there's an intergenerational justice aspect to climate change that I think means it's important that we kind of think about children as well. And then there's perhaps two quick points I'll make. One is that the young people are transforming the debate around climate change. And I think it's therefore upon us who no longer can, apart from in a couple of countries, and most countries can't define ourselves as young people. There's, I think, Zambia, you're allowed to be quite, so there's a few countries where young is a broad definition. But anyway, those of us who mostly wouldn't define themselves as young anymore, I think it's upon us to try and say, well, what can we do to actually help empower and inform those youth climate activists who are really transforming the debate around climate and climate mitigation. And then I had a fourth one, but I've totally forgotten it. So we'll come back to it if I do. But in terms of their prominence in the debate, I think the answer is no. They're not. It's not sufficiently prominent in debate. And I would just offer a brief reason for why that is. We've essentially got two issues that are complicated and therefore ignored, and then we're talking about the intersection of them. Early childhood especially is very complex and seen as made more complex than it seems to be, and young children are far too missing from our general kind of the mechanisms we have to governance, for example, young people's votes, all that sort of conversation. But at the same time, you've got climate, which is again this highly contested area. So then you have this problem of the piece that's in the overlap is sort of double complicated. And amongst journalists, I can totally understand why you go, oh God, childhood's important, but it's quite complicated, the science of brain development. Climate is pretty complicated, it's pretty contested. I'm going to try and get good at one of these, but being good at all of it, quite hard. And I think those things tend to get missed a little bit.
Thank you so much for that, Rob. And you mentioned the importance of intergenerational, sort of the intergenerational look at the issue of climate. And this is why I want to come to Bavreen. Bavreen, I'd love to go to your experience because you became an activist for clean air in Delhi when your twin girls were born, basically. So can you bring us back to how that happened and why it became important?
Yes, Irene. I mean, I don't have to say that every, I shouldn't say mother, every parent wants the best for the children, and of course, the most important and the critical thing is the health, and we all wish and pray for the best. But unfortunately, there are things beyond us, and then that is something that was happening. I mean, of course, like for me, the campaign became rigorous when the girls were born. But a couple of years before that, I was noticing that there was something not right with the air, with something. That time it was a something, because it's 2 decades ago, and it wasn't being talked about, and we didn't know. We knew our water was dirty. We knew there was problem in food, sanitation, but no one was speaking about air. But then we were watching the smog of London and, those kind of things. So, and my girls were born, and they were also born in the 6th month of my pregnancy. And that was also very, very, difficult. And they were very tiny and weighed 600 grams each. So we were told to keep them very careful and, protected if we wanted them to survive. And of course, that made me obviously more concerned, because the problems started in the very early years, that the children, both of them, and I was watching the other children as well, that their colds and coughs wouldn't go. If they started coughing, and more than the coughing, the cold, it wouldn't go for months. Until you would exit the city or the country, it would magically be gone by a day, So, and, as the elders and around, and so, some of the doctors would say it's allergy, it's probably allergy or something, but that allergy was not the correct diagnosis, and there was something else. And again, there was something else, is like, you thought, what is it, So it meant that, of course, I was putting some work and research together, but we are not experts. Like, you said Rob was here and he spoke about, he knows, he can say, and he's credible. But what is it? I'm a mother. I've not studied it, and I have no expertise. So we started seeking this help from doctors and scientists around us, and trying to speak to them. And then, of course, in a country like mine, we may call it a democracy, but nobody wants to come out in the open and criticize, because whenever you're criticizing air and water, you're basically criticizing the government. And it's obviously not acceptable. As a journalist, I'm sure you understand that. And so it was one or two good voices, like Dr. Arvind Kumar and Dr. Trehan, who came up with these studies, and not quoting international studies. There were no studies of India at that point of time. And suddenly these terms like AQI, which is Air Quality Index, or PM, these started becoming terms that were being talked about, but only with a very small number of people, who were interested, or who were experts, or who were studying, researching, or maybe it was their bread and butter or something like that. And until this thing. So of course, I mean, I'll just ended there with the thing that yes, it was the children, and the children was suffering. You could see quite clearly that something is happening. But from then to now, which is November 2021, we had a study in my city, Delhi, which is the most polluted in the world, that every 3rd child has damaged lungs. So if say in year 1999 or 2000, between 2003, if we had admitted to this and worked on it, probably these children, which includes my daughter's generation as well, would have survived and not had this damage done.
Yes, Barine, thank you for that. And in one of the pieces that we'll share briefly here, you say that being a child in Delhi is the equivalent of smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a
Yeah.
day in terms of effect. And staying a little bit with that tobacco climate change parallel, I want to come to Katie. Katie, your book is very illuminating when it comes to showing just how important children are when we look at climate change. And among many things, you kind of draw this parallel of how much the fossil fuel industry is trying to confuse the situation in using similar strategies to what the tobacco industry did back in the day. But bring us a step back. Tell us why you started looking at the intersection between children and climate change. Because, and to be honest, it was quite hard to actually find journalists that were sort of covering both as a beat. So take us through that process.
Well, I was working at Frontline, and we got a grant to do a story about climate change and its sort of disproportionate impact on women and children. For that story, we wound up going to the Marshall Islands, which, famously is very imperiled, existentially imperiled by rising sea levels and some other impacts of the climate crisis. And we were talking to kids there, and it was pretty remarkable how fluent they were in talking about climate change, more so than most adults I know here. And that's because it's an existential issue there. The adults are talking about it. They're exposed. They're learning about it in school every year from age 6, a lot of them. And one of the kids that we focused on, his family was considering immigrating to Oklahoma, where they had some extended family. And so the question arose, okay, well, if this 9-year-old who can tell me all about melting glaciers, the impact on the wildlife, how he's seen things change on the reef as he swims every day. If he moves to Oklahoma, what will he learn in school there? And so that was sort of one of the origin questions, the animating questions of my reporting. And they didn't wind up immigrating, but I did wind up visiting the town that they were going to go to. And I went to a high school there. There's a pretty large Marshallese community. This is in a town called Enid, Oklahoma. And I talked to five teenagers whose family had immigrated, and 4 of the 5 said that I was the first adult to ever talk to them about climate change on school grounds, right? So they had never heard the words climate change at school. And so that just gives you a sense, just the beginning of a sense of what climate education looks like. And it's not some of it is aimed at very young kids. There's actually a state agency in Oklahoma that's funded by the fossil fuel industry entirely, and it produces a ton of curricula about the energy industry. And surprise, surprise, very little of that includes basically none of it talks about climate change. But it's, 98% of schools use this when they talk about energy. And some of them are school books aimed at kindergartners. That's talking about, the one that Jenny Zhu wrote about it's called Petro Pete's big bad dream. And he has this nightmare that he wakes up and there's no oil in the world, and his whole life is transformed, and it's a nightmare. But fortunately he wakes up and it was all just a bad dream, and he's got all of his petroleum products again. And that is the kind, that's in every school in Oklahoma that has that book in it. And that is the message that these quite young kids are picking up about about the energy industry, and that's not accidental. That is, that is in the interest of the industry.
Thank you for that, Katie. I'm gonna check out that book. It sounds quite terrifying. And Rob, I want to come back to you because Katie has explained how she sort of ended up working on climate and children, sort of coming from another side. But I want to come back to you because I want to ask you in which ways climate change has more obvious consequences on children. You touched on it briefly. Bahrain, of course, touched on the idea of air quality. But I want to ask because we reporters may be already working sort of on the area without realizing just how much that area is affected by climate change. And so break it up for us a little bit, if you like.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, because look, the bottom line is there are probably ways that the climate will affect almost every aspect of many people's lives, and especially people living in vulnerability or socioeconomic disadvantaged communities particularly. So I think there are multiple ways, just to sort of maybe work out from some of the kind of macro down almost, which is the opposite to where we normally do, but just see how it goes. Things like, you've talked already about migration, and probably one of the biggest drivers currently of migration is likely to be scarcity of water and food security, and the conflicts that leads to. So mass migration at the moment in South Asia around floods, really catastrophic floods. And of course, in those contexts, young people are the most vulnerable, or at least amongst the most vulnerable. It's both ends of the age spectrum, actually. Older people are also vulnerable, but young people especially are a particular vulnerability. And that's both through the kind of, we can break that vulnerability down into mechanisms. So we can say things like food insecurity. And we know that developing children really, again, that early childhood nutrition determines a lot about physical and more importantly, kind of neurological development. So young children are vulnerable in that way too. If we think also around, I mentioned conflict, but then also more broadly looking at food security and nutrition, I think it's certainly plausible that impacts on major food production areas and impacts on both quantity and quality of diet that's produced for young children will be amongst the biggest impacts that climate will have on health. So I think it's really important we understand that. Another way of flipping this is, and some of my work is around flipping away from these problems towards solutions. The other way of looking at this is that some of those dietary changes are absolutely critical, and dietary improvements are absolutely critical to us maintaining the global warming and the global heating to less damaging effects. So for example, yes, we can say there's a food insecurity problem that will present and affect young children's health and development. But there's another story, which is that if we shift all of our diets, we'll probably be a bit more healthy. In fact, potentially quite a lot more healthy. So that's things like more plant-based foods, lower particularly processed meats. And then going kind of taking that further, we can also see a whole other sets of impacts that are fairly, kind of more, in some ways more obvious. So air pollution is the one that Bahrain really powerfully talked about, and I think it's very obviously often a really good entry point into these issues. We can broadly in our heads, it's reasonably simple for us to say burning things produces CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Burning things also produces air pollution. Air pollution is bad for us. If we stop burning things, that will be good for us, and it will be good for the climate. That's not a complicated chain to, as a journalist, to kind of walk your reader through. As I mentioned, young people are particularly vulnerable. One thing that I would like to try and leave you all with is that, of course, lung health is part of this. And in fact, lung health is almost always the way we start, because we get the air pollution in our lungs. It makes us cough, it makes our children cough, it increases risk of asthma, it undermines the actual development of the lungs. But it doesn't stop there. I think the bit that to me is sort of one of the sort of alarm bells were ringing moments was when I started looking more at some of the science here, and we learned from some really quite incredible, when you think about it, studies where they put people in sort of air gas chambers connected to a diesel engine and had them on an exercise bike breathing the diesel pollution. Very powerful. The sort of stuff that nowadays is just inconceivable that you do it ethically. The reason it was ethical is that the levels of pollution they were exposed to were almost the same or lower than we were regularly exposing our children to on roadsides in London. So it wasn't super high. But what they showed is that there's a systemic effect. So it's on the whole body. So it's not just the lungs, it's an inflammatory effect. And there was a paper, I think, out last week or this week showing that black carbon has been detected in the developing fetus and in the umbilical cord. So yes, the lungs, but we need to take it on further, and we need to understand it's actually a whole body thing. It's a whole body effect, and that affects things like pregnancy outcomes. It affects growth and linear growth, as well as the more obvious kind of respiratory effects. So I could go on for days on this stuff, but I think the core point is that it's both kind of macro and micro, individual and stories, and it's also a whole body system that we can think about, whether that's nutrition and the food versus the air pollution and the effects that has on our bodies.
And I dare to add, Rob, that there's also an element of considering mental health, right? Like, I guess that anxiety is a huge thing. And I want to come back to Bavreen, like, as a mother of newborn premature twins, I can't even really imagine like the amount of anxiety that they're not being well coached for you. And I wonder how much, you weren't believed for a long time. You were told by politicians that you were making what you were saying up, etc. But that eventually changed. How did you sort of garner the support of maybe other mothers and other parents in India and then beyond India, focusing exactly on this, on something that is very human and that I think a lot of people can relate to? You're a mother and you want the best for your children, and you want not to carry this anxiety on you because it comes from an external man-made cause.
Yes, Irene, it's not been an easy journey. It's, I think for most of us here, I'm sure we all kind of feel this way, that this is a lonely battle because not many people join in. It's frustrating that if I say we had a wonderful protest and we had 300 people, I mean, I'm living in a city of 20 million and we have just 300 people and we're very happy with that. So this itself shows that, the reason that everyone should be, if as a parent, we all wish the same, then why are we not here demanding that clean air, or we're not demanding the health that we desire for our children for the future? So this is a challenge, and I was speaking earlier that it's basically in a country like mine, we have the elite or the people who are privileged like myself, and we think we can buy everything. We can buy clean air, we can buy clean water, so we don't care. I'll use air purifiers in my car and take my children every day to school, drive them instead of the bus. So those kind of problems that we have with the privileged and the underprivileged, like Robert just said, people who can't, in poverty and who are more vulnerable, they are so busy. They are so busy fending that 2 square meals for the children that it's just not, it's just they don't have the time and the means to even worry about something else. Their challenges are so many. Even COVID was not they were not scared of COVID because they have bigger problems. I mean, how does a mother like me feel that I don't have anything to give to my children to eat in the evening? So my immediate worry is only that, and I don't think beyond that. So this is a big challenge. But yes, something that Robert said, and it's very close to my heart, it was also storytelling. That is what has brought in, people, and whether joining hands of asthma, of the COPDs, then certain visuals that have impacted. So there was a campaign where, there's a lungs designed on a huge billboard with HEPA filter, and that was put in outside the hospitals in Delhi. And within the 2 days, it was absolutely white. Within 2 days, it became gray. And this became a huge campaign. So even the commoners, like even till today, this is a 2016 campaign, I think 2016. I travel in public transport in the bus, or we have those autos, the drivers, they speak to me about that. They remember it. So it like hit everyone. Or Dr. Arvind Kumar, his desk has these 2 jars of lungs. One is of a young kid who probably died in Delhi, and they're absolutely black lungs. And then there is this another state and city where, which is clean air, and that's pink color lungs, So these things are hard hitting. They work on your mind. And stories, and from coal mines, we've had mothers and women tell us stories. Even people like me who apparently think we are well read and all, but we don't know. The situations are so different. Every urban and rural chemistry is different. The cities have different chemistry. So this is how joining dot by dot and various things. It's not been easy, but yes, now. Even a Hindi-speaking person who doesn't speak English knows what is pollution. They speak the word pollution, so air pollution. So they understand that, yes, the air is dirty. The government, of course, after the National Clean Air Plan and whatever they're doing now, you cannot say they're in denial. They know, they admit it. But yes, the action is not enough. And that is why we are where we are. And so now all our actions, even as warrior moms, and this thing is all action-based. Because we are tired of hearing, we are tired of listening to excuses year after year. Damage is being done. I'm fighting this battle for 18 years, but my twins have damaged lungs, and we should not be willing to accept this. So this is how, we still are doing our best, that we can join more stories. We can all come together as mothers, as parents, as citizens, and work on various ways of getting. I always say that to politicians and leaders, that they are parents too. How can they not think like us? They have to think the same way. So they do admit it. But as you and I know it, unfortunately, the actions are quite different. That's why since COP26 to now, we've seen they've reversed a lot of decisions, and the war has taken another aspect on fossil fuels and etc. I think that's what I have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Bhavin. Katie, I want to come to you because there's something, of course, the situation in Delhi when it comes to air pollution is so extreme, and in a way it's so clear the impact on lungs. Okay, to begin with, of course, Rob was talking about the knock-on effects, and there are so many other effects. But and you had the example of the Marshall Islands, where children were very clear about what was happening, how the climate around them was changing. So what happens in Oklahoma? You were starting to talk about it, but what happens when you start reporting on this in the US, where the issue may not be so urgent, maybe from a perspective of sort of the immediate daily life? There's one story that you tell that I think is very interesting in that sense. You talk about one teacher, Mr. Noakes, who's, I guess, a climate change denier, and that he draws a parallel between the sort of confusing research about eggs and cholesterol and climate science, which of course is very different. But tell me how you went about as a journalist to try and sort of approach people that were denying evidence and were denying that anything is happening just because maybe it's not happening on their own skin at that very moment.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to that. First of all, I think there is a way that it, because it's not blackening our children's lungs, like right this moment in front of us, and they're coughing at all times of the day, every day. And the way that Bhavin is describing, I think there is a sort of some level of plausible kind of denial that that has been accepted. But as Rob points out, there's no person whose life is not already affected, and no child whose life is not going to be affected in every way by this, right? So, and like I would just say, you know, like the climate denial in the US, it has had to evolve because people are seeing, like, you know, because for a long time it was just like, it's not happening at all. And then like, it's not human cause. But like anybody who walks out the front door, no matter where they live and is paying attention to their environment, they're seeing this, they're seeing it. It's not, so now they've evolved to being like, well, you know, maybe it's happening, but it's part of a cycle, because they have to accept, you know, they have to put into the narrative that things are changing in a way that they didn't 20, 30 years ago, right? So Mr. Noakes was a teacher he's an environmental science teacher. And this is just one anecdote, but I think it is telling about what kind of the how American politics plays into education. You know, what we know is that American teachers are not all that great at teaching climate change. American schools don't all require it. But, you know, we have teachers everywhere, intrepid teachers that are teaching it. And then we have teachers like Mr. Noakes, who's an environmental science teacher in high school, who should be teaching it. It's actually part of his curriculum. But he politically is he has bought the climate denial argument because he's watching media that is promoting that narrative. And so, you know, he's telling, and he has this sort of like skepticism of mainstream science. That's that story about the eggs that you mentioned, that like, he's like, they used to tell us that, you know, eggs caused heart attacks, and that was wrong. And that devastated the egg industry. And like now the same thing is happening to the fossil fuel industry. It's just not all that certain. And that's what he's telling his students. And so, you know, hundreds of students a year are leaving his classroom with this idea that like, they're sort of inoculated. They're already influenced, like, well, like people talk about climate change, but like, is it really happening? Maybe the science isn't that good. And so when they do hear about climate change in their life, that's already implanted in their head that it's not real. And that happens, you know, not just in conservative places, but like in my own hometown, in my own alma mater, Chico Junior High School. I talked to a junior high teacher who was teaching climate change in her classroom, in her science class, and then like found out that her students were walking out of her class, walking into a history class where their history teacher was showing them like videos about how climate change isn't real. And then they come back to her class and say, why are we learning about it? It's not even real, you know? So like, that is like two teachers in the same hallway of the same school who have this very radically different approach to it, but and an understanding of it. And like, these kids are 11, you know, and they're two adults that they trust are telling them super different things about this phenomenon that will affect their lives, right? So I think that's a situation that a lot of American kids are in. We know that that's a situation that a lot of American, not all, like some kids are have different educational experiences, but it's really common because of the political divide and like how entrenched climate denialism has been in this country for so long that it's like that adult politics seeps into the world of children here.
And Katie, I want to finish this thought because what's very interesting, one of the things that you mentioned in the book also is that actually children are way more flexible than adults when it comes to actually changing their views, meaning that even if they come from a maybe politically conservative family that believes that climate change does not exist, if they hear the right data from the right sources, then they're very willing to take a different opinion and to go with it. So just to finish your thought, how important is it that we actually know and control better what's being taught in schools?
I mean, we know that not only are kids more open to new information and less kind of entrenched in this ideology because they haven't had enough time, most of them haven't had enough time or influence to do so, but that there's also an intergenerational effect. So there was a study that looked at kids in, I don't remember, Kentucky or South Carolina or something, who were learning about climate change in school and measured their parents' concern about the climate crisis. And they found that their parents became more concerned when their kids were educated because they're coming home, they're talking to their parents over school, and that this effect was most pronounced in conservative families and most pronounced between little girls and their fathers. And so educating kids can have this kind of ripple effect through families intergenerationally, and it can also have an impact on on the decisions that they make when they become adults, which is not so far away. And that could, and I mean, I think that's why the fossil fuel industry has been so interested in spreading climate denial among children, because they're the ones who are going to be making the decisions. And so, for the fossil fuel industry, it's like at some point they're going to have to stop extracting oil. Does that happen in 5 years? Does that happen in 30 years? Does that happen in 75 years? And that difference is a matter of trillions of dollars to them, right? And so if they can seed this doubt in children, this apathy or this questioning, then that buys them more time, the industry more time to extract fossil fuels, to make money off of their industry, right?
Thank you, Katie. Rob, I see your mic is open, and I actually want to come to you because when we spoke earlier this week, one of the things that I was asking you is, what do you think that we journalists get wrong when we're trying to report on, climate and children, which we don't do very much of. But and one of the things that you mentioned was that we have a really hard time, and I think you're right, to describe that, to sort of describe uncertainty. So I love to come back to you about that as, again, the expert in terms of can you come up with tips or ideas or ways that you think we could do a better job at dealing with situations like the ones that Katie dealt?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, one thing to say is that I do think that there are examples of where the media does well on some of this too, and it's good to acknowledge that. I think that some of the powerful stories in the UK, the one that's been totally kind of transformative is a horribly sad story around a girl called Ellie Kisidebra, who was the first person, I think, in the world to have air pollution listed as a cause of death on her death certificate, and her mother's been a very powerful campaigner. But I think there's examples there that show, as Bavreen said, of where the media is good at telling the story. I guess coming to your point around where there could be more, I think it's about, the history of climate reporting has obviously been fairly tainted by this concerns around kind of false balance, and this idea that uncertainty give equal voice to the near consensus view and the very small number of people who deviate from that. I actually think on things like child health, I think you'll find that even harder, not least because I think the whole arena of reporting around climate and environment has moved beyond that, thankfully, but also because I think you just won't find anybody. When we do our work looking at air pollution and child health, yes, you find other scientists who might sometimes challenge the methods or point to some uncertainties, but you won't find anyone who outright says this is not an important point. So I would say feel relatively confident. Go and find get some independent appraisal of things. But, there are enough networks now of scientists, and we're all happy to direct to people who would, if you ask an academic, tell me the critique of this. We're very used to writing in our papers the section on limitations, and if there's no limitations section, it's a red flag anyway. But there will be one in any good journal paper, and that's because the part of the sort of scientific process is finding those. And I think we're all more than happy to actually talk through those too. So there's a way to say, look, here are the limitations, but on the balance, of probabilities. We think this is a causal association, and we think it's very, you know, and we can tell a very good story. I often think of it like the sort of judge and jury versus the sort of more simplistic kind of way of thinking about it. I think when you take a judge and jury approach on the balance of probabilities, where you try to say, let's look across Bavrin's story of her kids in Delhi, or my story of my kids on a street in London, plus the kind of the wet lab biology of people who are kind of blasting cells with diesel fumes and seeing what happens to the cells, with the stories of the people in the chambers on the exercise bikes being with a diesel generator pumping the exhaust in, it actually becomes a very strong story. And it doesn't, so there's a sort of, I feel like journalists need to feel confident to report that and just build the relationships with the academics, connect with people who are working in this. And I don't think any of us would overstate. In fact, we're all very careful about not overstating evidence, or at least we try to. So I don't know, I don't have any sort of magic bullets on that, but I do think it's the right thing to be understanding. Uncertainty can put people off, but there's also a kind of a reasonably well-trodden path for making sure we don't misstep on that. And I think initiatives like this are really good because they give us a chance to kind of meet and talk. And certainly, if anyone, we have a Centre for Planetary Health and Climate Change at London School, where we routinely would be able to kind of field questions to experts and world-leading experts, and there's similar centres around the world increasingly. So it's, you know, make those friends, make those connections. I'm certainly looking forward to meeting Bavrin and Katie in Cairo, not Cairo, Sharm el-Sheikh, then later in the month or next month, I hope. You know, I think we need to build those connections and really try and work together, because this is a whole societal challenge. Academics and academia are part of it, but we really need to be working together to do that. And that's partly, sorry, I'll stop talking in a second. That's partly why some of our work is also about working with young people themselves. So much like Katie said, there's a reason this sort of pest of power is used by food industry to change dietary choices. It works. Young people's perspectives influence others. Also, young people have the right to be involved in decisions that affect their lives. That's the UNICEF, the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. So we have a responsibility, if we're going to talk in language of human rights, to listen to young people and find ways to engage with them, not just kind of talk about them.
Thank you for that, Rob. I just want to say that we've got some kind of 20 minutes or so. So if you want to start asking questions, we have something around mental health that Shweta asked. I'll come back to that in a second. But if you want to start, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll come back to them soon. And Bavrin, I want to come to you, similarly to what I asked Rob. What do you, I guess, as a mother, as a concerned mother, and as an activist, what have you seen gone wrong when it comes to media coverage, and what would be your tips to journalists trying to cover both the story of a mother, but also bigger events like the COP27 that is coming up, from the perspective also of mothers and children, I guess?
Irene, as far as air pollution is concerned, or trees that I really work for in my city, I have very thankful to the media because, you know, we are no one, we're just nobody, you know, we're just ordinary citizens, and it's them who always reached out to citizens like us and helped us and did a lot. But when it comes to climate crisis and the climate change, there is very little coverage. And the other thing, that the very big mistake, that's not so much of the media, or it's to do with us as well, is our language that we speak even in our own panels, and we are keeping it limited to the English. We have to be working on the media, which is, you know, our Indian Hindi language or the local regional languages, because that's where the masses are, and that is where we tend to just speak to each other and you know, keep repeating this mistake. So even for the media, you know, they have to kind of come to the masses and speak about this to them. only then we are going to be, all on the same platform. So this is something as far as my immediate Delhi and this thing is concerned. But yes, India-wise, if you see, now we are, of course, talking more, but it is annoying because so many times you see these articles which are, we know that the government's just given it and the press releases, and that damages a lot of our work. But because I know those young journalists so well and all that, there is challenge. After all, everyone is doing their job, and there is a certain accountability, something, that they have to, go back to the editors and all. But the point is that when they come back to you and share this and say that they wanted to do this, but we couldn't, but we will do something, from your side to cover this up or, balance that out, then half the battle is won, because you feel good about it. So this is it. And of course, the international media has to come much stronger. And, even for the loss and damage now, we've had a lot of support from the international media, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Bhavrin. We have a couple of questions along the same lines that sort of are asking about mental health, but I want to go to Katie first because, of course, we were talking about mental health and anxiety and the effects of climate change, which sometimes are very immediate. Katie, one of the things you did, of course, was be in California just after one of the huge fires, devastating fires, and you got to talk to some of the kids that had to run away, to escape, right, from their town. So, going back to the idea that this is a webinar for journalists, tell us where you were, what you did, and how you dealt with the trauma that these children had gone through. And unmute yourself, please.
That was bound to happen sometime to me. The town that I'm from is right next to a town called Paradise, and it famously burned down to the ground, the whole city, in a wildfire that is the kind of which is becoming much more common, and scientists have linked to climate change. And the kids in that town all were lost their homes, lost their school, and were evacuated to Chico, and were like being schooled in warehouses, and it was all very kind of apocalyptic. And all of these kids were terribly traumatized. They almost all of them had literally escaped through flames. And so, I was reporting on them as they were learning about climate change. This town is also quite conservative. And so a lot of these kids, if they'd heard anything about climate change, it was that it was a hoax. And then they were in 7th grade, they were getting a lesson on climate change, and I was there observing it. And I talked to a lot of the kids and had them kind of talk to them about their stories, and kind of tried to be gentle in my approach, and make sure it was very clear to these students that they could walk away, that it wasn't, they didn't have any obligation to talk to me. They could stop at any moment. But nonetheless, it's like hard to figure out like what is the line. Like there was one moment I was telling you about that this kid was telling me about escaping and just being scared that his father died because his father stopped texting, and he just started weeping in front of me. And I was just like, wow, like I don't know, like am I re-traumatizing this kid by making him relive this moment with me, someone, an adult, a stranger, effectively. So I just tried to be as like comforting, open, give him all the permissions to set any boundaries that he wanted, and, kind of make sure had somewhere to go afterward and so on. But it's like, it is like, I'm no expert on, you're much more expert on young childhood and trauma, but like as a reporter, it is something that you have to navigate if you're reporting on children and climate change. So I'm not sure I totally aced it in all of my reporting, but I did try to approach it with a sense of like as much compassion and protection as I could while also doing my job.
Yes, thanks for that, Katie. And I think it's these are all things that we talk about a lot at the Dart Center. We've had previous webinars on how to deal with trauma and how trauma affects children. We've also dealt with migration and sort of becoming orphaned. They're all topics that unfortunately are related to each other and that intersect with the idea of climate. So again, I'll leave the link because there are so many things that obviously you did right, but that it's very hard to get used to as well when reporting on children, especially when they're very young. And because we're talking about also mental health and trauma and re-traumatizing, there are two very interesting questions from Shweta and Camille here in the chat. So Shweta is saying that she's a teacher, and what she found is that there are children who are getting eco-anxiety when they become aware of the reality about climate change. And so she asks, what's your take on how to deal with such a situation? And Camille is asking, I have a similar question. I work with children in schools, especially teenagers, on media and environmental education issues with an association. I find it difficult not to depress them. They often say things like, we're in a dead end, or they have kind of no future thoughts. So how do you deal with it working with young generations? So I know that this is nobody's expertise particularly right now, but I would love to hear this because this is also something that really is important for us journalists to think about, because you obviously want to interview them and their families about the effects of climate, but then if the anxiety that is provoked is so high, then how are we thinking about it? So maybe we can do a quick round. Rob, I'll come to you first, and then I'll ask Bavreen and Katie as well their thoughts on this issue.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. It's a really important one. I guess it applies to all reporting that's with and about children to some extent, although there is certainly an argument that this is a particularly important example of where we need to think harder. I would defer to say I'm not an expert, but there has been an awful lot written around this. So I would say there was actually a special edition of the I think the International Journal of Psychiatry had a recent issue all around kind of climate change and mental health, and one of the issues is there, and I can try and dig out I'll try and send that to you, Irene, afterwards. But I guess the two things I would say is, one is I think what's worth bearing in mind is that the impacts of climate on society are fairly toxic for mental health. So some of the different scenarios for the future that we may be facing and what that means will be very negative, affecting to people's well-being and including their mental health and well-being. We know, for example, displacement is a real aggravator of mental ill health. So I think there's a point to which we need to not balance these, but hold them both in mind. This idea that actually there is a necessity of talking about this, because actually the future brings harm too. The second slightly less sort of philosophical one is that I think very practically in our work with young people, we've been mostly working with young people who are quite engaged already in the kind of climate campaigning and helping, and we've been trying to work with them to help them help drive our research work. And I don't want to sort of speak for them other than to say that we've had, certainly a number of them have said to us how much there's something therapeutic around feeling like you're part of the solution. And I think I don't want to overstate that. I don't think that makes the idea of a sort of anxiety go away. But I certainly think there is something to be said for the idea that being engaged, whether it's as a sort of activist on the streets or an academic researcher, it feels better than just a sense of essentially some very troubled futures. The only other thing is I would say is that that doesn't make those the kind of wider issues of eco-anxiety go away. I think it deserves an awful lot more kind of attention and thought as well.
Thank you, Rob. Bavreen, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Irene, for this. Yes, I've absolutely on the same lines. I'm just, so Irene, we just lost power. Just give me a minute. Could you ask Katie? I'm just trying to get the
Absolutely.
on. Sorry,
Katie, go for it.
Yeah. What I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer this, but what I can say is the teachers that I spoke to and who I thought were doing the best job of talking to kids about this, acknowledged those feelings, just called it out, let them call it out, let them feel it. It's like it's the truth. It's not an irrational feeling, right? But then also, I heard people talk about like the difference between individual action, that having some action to take, as Rob just said, and like feeling part of the solution is really essential to can be really helpful in dealing with that anxiety. But also there's a difference between individual action and collective action, and like pushing kids to do individual action, like riding their bikes to school or whatever, when they really have so little control over their lives and the world, is actually can be, almost more damaging. But collective action, like participating in something that Bavreen is talking, like kind of group action, feeling part of a community that's trying to take action, can feel much more empowering. And so the teachers that I talked to that were kind of doing the best at addressing their kids' feelings about this were kind of helping them, if they wanted to, participate in collective action on this issue, and that they felt like that was the best way to kind of lead their students through this very incredibly stressful thing that is happening to them.
Thank you, Katie, for that. And Bavreen, if you've got energy again, I'll also mention that our Kids Climate, Becky from our Kids Climate, of which you're participating as a fellow of one of their programs, has just shared a guide here on how to talk to children about climate, both for parents and teachers. So just check in the chat, because that's also very helpful. But Bavreen, you're over to you.
Yes, thank you, Irene. That's a brilliant article. Everyone must just paste it and keep it. I, of course, when it comes to kids, even here, Fridays for Future and many other movements that were going on, we never kind of, I wouldn't discourage telling children that, okay, fine, you want to, you should ride a bike. But I just hate these narratives that are thrown at us by the politicians and the leaders, because I may give up my whole family, may give up the cars and want to use the public transport. One, there isn't a decent public transport system. That is their job, the government's job to give us. Secondly, we may give up every car in a family, even the extended family, but it will not make 0.000000001% of a difference of that thermal power plant emissions that are coming, because I can't do anything about that. That is something, again, the leaders and the politicians will have to do it. So unfortunately, all this say no to plastic and those type of narratives are just so wrong as adults that we fall in that trap. But it doesn't work. Why are the plastics available, first of all? If you are banning them, if you think they're wrong, they should not be available. If they are available, you are using fossil fuels, and then you're incinerating them and further polluting and all that. So it's really not got to do anything with us. If our governments are going to govern, they will be the correct leaders, we will follow. It's like a family. The head of the family leads. In every family, it could be a mom, dad, grandparent, and you lead, and everyone follows that. This is exactly how your own chief ministers, your own ministers, your parliamentarians have to be. If they will lead, we will follow. In my city, we segregate waste. but by the time the waste reaches downstairs into the thing, it's mixed. So don't blame us. Don't tell me to do it. They have to do it. If I don't do it, penalize me, or if I do it, incentivize me. But don't ask me to put all the onus on myself that I'll give up my car. But yes, the politician has a whole convoy of 18 cars going with one politician. It's not going to work. So this is what we have to understand. And of course, like I said, I don't usually like to encourage this with the kids. They must learn all the good habits and they must learn all the good things, but they must also learn to question the legislators. That is what is very, very important.
Yes, but Rina, you're also bringing up something that is very important, which is the element of sort of inequality when it comes to the climate crisis, right? Which is, you know, we may all sort of get all the children in Delhi to start biking, but of course that's not really going to reverse anything unless the fossil fuel industry does something about it. And, you know, it's mainly coming from the developing countries, who are, of course, the most polluting countries. So I think that's also something that is very important to have in our prism as journalists, that sometimes we really like, I think sometimes it's encouraging, for example, to be reporting on solutions, but then it's also important to understand just how small the solutions are, or what the real impact can be vis-a-vis the bigger sort of greater issue, which is of course much more complex than that. So I would love to thank you all, Bahrain, Rob, and Katie, for this chat that has been really interesting, and I hope it helped the journalists here and others that will be watching it later. If you have any final thoughts, you can feel free to raise your hand and we can give it another 2 minutes. But otherwise, I'd be happy to leave everyone with links here, and to just say that you can find this webinar again on our DART page. Rob, Katie, Bahrain, last minute possibility for one extra thing.
The only thing I would say is thank you very much, Irene, Katie, and Bahrain. I think it's been a really fascinating conversation and I've enjoyed listening to you.
That's great. I had a good time too. So that's the best of all worlds. So thank you again. And I hope that this will also encourage more journalists that are interested in climate, but maybe not so sure how to report on children, to sort of look at all the issues together so that we can, you know, really put the right emphasis on you know, the generation that will be affected next and is already affected. Thank you so much, and bye to everyone.
Irene.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.